Well, strong and very, very clear and important words there from Inessa Grace. Thank you so much for that. And it is hearing real stories like these that drives us to turn political ambition into implementation and close the protection gap with climate and disaster risk finance and insurance. And that leads us directly to our next speaker, who has a very special announcement to make. She is the Vice Rector in Europe and Director of the United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security. And she'll now present the Strategic Evidence Roadmap for CDRFI that will help the InsuResilience Global Partnership community create effective programs and policies based on a solid groundwork of evidence. Please welcome Dr. Xiaomang Shen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chairwoman. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Your Excellencies and distinguished colleagues. It's truly my pleasure to speak here today. I would like to thank the organizers for putting together such an important and relevant event. Climate and disaster finance has come a long way, and InsuResilience Annual Forum is now an institution in itself. It helps us in taking stock of what has happened to collectively learn and come together as a community. The climate crisis is now. Climate change is increasing the frequency and impact of natural hazards and extreme weather. Global disparities mean that these risks pose a greater and, in some instances, even existential threat to lives and livelihood, especially in Global South. Without adequate disaster finance strategies and tools in place, exposed countries, communities, and individuals have very few options to prepare financially for the disastrous impacts of climate change. Lack of strategies and instruments might mean that emergency response is delayed, reconstruction and recovery hampered. This has long-term consequences for livelihoods and economic growth. Countries and communities may be unable to invest in risk mitigation and preparedness, and they may take on unsustainable debt burden to cope with potential disaster situations. Finance and insurance have a critical role to play in helping countries, communities, and individuals to manage climate and disaster risks. While there are many different solutions, practitioners urgently need to scale up those options that work for them. So today, I want to focus on the role of evidence in the necessary surge of disaster finance and insurance. For this to happen, we have to scale up by influencing the regulation and enabling conditions for wider replication. And we also have to scale out to reach much more people for replication. In the meantime, we need to scale deep. That means impacting behaviors of stakeholders that make disaster finance instruments possible and sustainable. In the past years, climate and disaster finance community brought forward many innovations and inventions. The InsuResilience Global Partnership itself played a large role in this. The next step now is really to focus on evidence-based scaling of different solutions. In order to facilitate necessary evidence instruments and investments, and to stimulate individual and collective evidence options, a group of academics, country representatives, experts, and practitioners have come together, and they have developed a strategic map, a guiding document showing where evidence actions need to happen. And all of this took place under the umbrella of the InsuResilience Global Partnership. Today, I take great pleasure in presenting to you the outcome of this process, the document From Innovation to Learning, a strategic evidence roadmap for climate and disaster risk finance and insurance. This roadmap highlights evidence and research frontiers along other themes. It suggests evidence investments that generate quick impacts to address questions of quality and cost effectiveness. It addresses persistent challenges that have plagued implementation over the past decades. And it signposts evidence frontiers that help to better understand and unleash the transformational potential of disaster finance and insurance. To realize the ambitions of evidence roadmap, stakeholders need to push individually and collectively. The document itself highlights relevant evidence norms, changes that all stakeholders need to implement in moving disaster finance and climate risk insurance forward. It points to evidence actions, specific actions that need to happen in the coming months and years to move things forward. This includes, for example, developing a common language for us to be able to collaborate with each other. And last, but the most importantly, the roadmap calls for evidence investments, supporting interventions, including targeted academic funding calls, will be essential for building up a stronger evidence base within climate and disaster finance. I'd also like to highlight it is a joint responsibility to further the evidence agenda. However, individual stakeholders have different roles to play. Clearly, academia is a major actor to innovate scientific methods. Governments need to commit to evidence-based policymaking and programming. For example, by objectively determining the public value of disaster finance approaches. Implementing agencies need to undergo nothing less than a paradigm shift, a shift that moves to honest, internal, and cross-agency learning and constant improvement. Private sector needs to embrace evidence actions to improve benchmarking of product parameters towards the needs of users and long-term demand. And finally, civil society, they are the actors in implementation and advocacy. They should feel very much empowered to use this evidence roadmap in their work. Your Excellencies and dear colleagues, I want to thank you that the theme of evidence plays such an important and prominent role in this year's forum. I'm expecting evidence commitments of agencies, countries, and stakeholders to be made public in the coming weeks. In my function to advise the UN system, I feel very much encouraged to promote dedicated evidence actions. Today and tomorrow, further discussions and debates on evidence will follow. Let me highlight, for example, tomorrow's breakout group at this annual forum. This group will be on impact and M&E at 10:30 Central European Time. Please don't miss it, because this breakout group will give you a deep dive into the evidence roadmap. Your Excellencies and dear colleagues, I would like to thank you so much for making this happen. And together, we're working towards a much more sustainable and safer world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shen, for sharing this hugely important framework with us. I'm sure it will contribute to many more success stories in the IGP community. Now, before we go to our next session, I would like to catch up with our host, Astrid Zwick, because we've heard an awful lot of interesting things already. And I would like to know from you, Astrid, because one thing certainly popped up again and again, and that was the word funding. Now, on the positive side, we heard from Dr. Flaxbart, of course, the pledge of €1 billion contribution towards achieving Vision 2025. How big a difference will that make, Astrid? I can't hear you. I hope everybody else can, because I can't, sadly. Let's try again.
Let's try again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. Okay, that's technique. So yes, thank you very much for this question. I think this is very important. We've seen that over the past 5 years, there were quite some funds coming together, and it is important to coordinate here as well to have the best impact of the budget coming in. So our intention is really to strive for better convergence and coordination among the donors, but also among the implementing partners. Monica, this is why also the reason why under the InsuResilience Global Partnership we have a delivery vehicle called the Program Alliance. It's an alliance of programs, as it says, to better coordinate action and make best use of the commitments, of the financial commitments that have been made over the past years. And in addition of that, we are setting up extensive monitoring and evaluation system to track and to keep track on the results, to keep track on the impact this money and these funds are having are having in concrete for the poor and vulnerable. So we are very strongly collaborating with our implementing partners here in order to get a kind of standardized approach to measure the impact and also to identify how much this has really had an effect on the poor and vulnerable people, how much each dollar, let's say, had an effect on the poor and vulnerable. I hope that gives a little bit of an overview about the work we're doing with regard to the funding that comes in to make it most effective and most efficient.
Yeah, and it sounds very promising, especially as you mentioned the most vulnerable. I mean, the V20 was speaking of that we've reached a point of no return. That somewhat echoes what a few people here at the very beginning with the polling answered when I asked what you expect of COP26. And I think it was about 5 or 6 participants who said, I don't expect anything because it is too late. So you're clearly very hopeful. How did you vote? I assume you were not among the 6.
No, of course not. I'm very optimistic because we basically have built a very solid foundation now with the partnership, gathering different political agendas even. Monica, we have here under the partnership the Sendai framework, so the UNDRR. We have under the partnership the climate, the Paris Agreement, UNFCCC, and the development program, UNDP, looking for achieving the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I mean, with all the implementing partners around, the multilateral banks and other organizations, and also our partners on the ground, I think with that huge and rich experience, we can turn the lever. In the past years, though, many programs have been still set up and are in the beginning. And if you, like me, come also from a private sector, you will know that setting up a new business, it takes some time. So it's not from one day to the other, and it takes time. It takes some years to get traction and to develop the appropriate products, to understand the risks. And we'll hear more over these days that understanding the risks in a particular country is really key to launch action and to tailor the appropriate solutions. So it's a major effort for all of us, but it also requires all hands, all brains to pull together and to realize this and bring action on the ground.
Right. Well, I read an article not too long ago, or just a few days ago actually, Astrid, which somewhat, my heart sank slightly, because at one of the previous COPs, the international community, you will know the exact amount, pledged to put a lot of money towards a fund to help those who stand most to lose by climate change. And those usually are the ones who did nothing towards climate change, but they're the ones who bear the brunt. And that article stated that the international community is lagging behind, that they will not achieve paying all that money in time, but that it will take many more years. How can CDRFI, if at all, bridge that gap?
Well, thank you again. This is really a challenging question and a challenging issue indeed. With a prearranged finance through climate and disaster risk finance and insurance, you can really prepare for taking action in the particular country. It is important to be ready and to be prepared. If a crisis happens, then you really get fast liquidity, fast payouts, just within a short-term time frame, to support and to support the country in taking action. So that's one thing that can be done. And with the partnership, we are trying really to get from the ex post approach, I mean, waiting until a disaster happens and then seeing what needs to be done, to an ex ante approach, really to become a risk manager rather than a crisis manager, to use and the budget that runs into particular programs like our regional risk pools, like agricultural schemes, for example, to really prepare before the crisis hits. And I think with that and with all the effort at various levels, at the local level, at national level, and at the international community, we hope that we can turn the lever, that all the funds that are gathered are getting and are somehow being put in the appropriate solutions, in more strategically as well, in comprehensive risk management approaches.
All right. Astrid, I have one more question, because I know that the last time we met for the InsuResilience Global Partnership Forum, it was fully digital. I mean, for most of you, this still feels fully digital, but this time I'm actually in a studio and we are slightly more daring. But nevertheless, the second year into this pandemic, how has the coronavirus impacted actually all those efforts out there? Has it made people more aware of the risk? Are there more people willing now to join the IGP, or are people getting more tired of it because they have enough other problems to deal with? What's your experience there?
So, Monica, it really has shown that risk can compound. So the corona situation has even aggravated the situation in countries, because there's a really little budget to no budget sometimes for coping with climate risks. And aggravated by the pandemic situation, the governments were really left with the little budget and little resources. So in order to overcome that, it's really important to identify, analyze all the risks that can occur. And indeed, it raised attention among those that had to deal with these crises now, overlapping even. I would say it has raised the attention.
It has raised the attention. And I really enjoy talking to you because there's so much one can learn. And of course, we're waiting for a very, very special guest, a Nobel Prize winner who is going to dive deep into the topics of alleviating global poverty, which is actually the issue that he won the Nobel Prize for. But until we can actually hear him, because I think he's joined us by now, and I'm going to tell you in a second who it is, but you can check in the program on the agenda, of course. We want to hear him, so we still have to figure that one out. Which brings me, of course, we have an awful lot of program ahead of us. We have this talk that we're all eager to listen to in a moment, as soon as it's possible. Do you have a couple of favorites, Astrid, that you think today and tomorrow you definitely don't want to miss? I mean, I know that you watch everything, but there are also parallel sessions where you have to make a choice.
Yeah, it's difficult to say, because I really would love to attend all if possible. And of course, now upcoming session will give us a sneak preview, probably in looking a little bit more into the future, how things can be developed. But I'm also very interested in listening to our speakers talking about the affordability of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance solutions coming up soon. We'll talk about something which we had ratified yesterday by our High Steering Committee. So it's good to have the perspective of the practitioners in, and connecting what we are doing at political level with the level on the implementation side. So watch out at that session, and many more to come. They will be all fantastic.
Brilliant. Astrid, as always, fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much.